till Marie. Tack så mycket.
Thank you, Afsane. I'm very pleased that I am the moderator today for this important discussion that we are going to have. I want to thank you, all of you, that you are coming here despite the very cold weather today, and it's Saturday, but we are very happy to have you here with us. We are going to have about 1 hour that Maryam will discuss the very significant and critical issues, and then we have like 45 minutes for comment and questions. And Maryam speaks English, and we try to translate if somebody wants to ask at Swedish. Unfortunately, I'm unable to present Maryam and her works, that I will let Maryam to introduce herself and start the seminar. Please, Maryam.
Good afternoon. Can you all see me? Do you want to move this way or on that side? Are you all right? Yeah? Okay. Or would you prefer me to sit down?
It's up to you.
I'm so democratic. Well, thank you very much for coming. It's a wonderful pleasure to be here. I suppose there's a lot of things we can talk about around these issues. So I'm going to throw out a few things, and hopefully, as is usually the case, there will be a lot of discussion and debate around it. I want to focus though on what's been called the Arab Spring. And I think, in fact, what we're seeing is that it represents a period of revolutions. And it's very exciting, isn't it? When you look at the fact that people from Tunisia to Egypt to Syria, they've risen up against dictatorship. And in a sense, it's a period of immense human development. And what it does is it shows that it is still possible for people to come out onto the streets and revolt. And that revolution is truly the most civilized form of resistance against oppression. And what it's done is it's proven all the anti-revolution and pro-status quo theoreticians wrong. And it's also signaled, in my opinion, the beginning of the end of the racist social policy of cultural relativism and multiculturalism, where people have been boxed into homogeneous communities, where dictatorship and Islamism is part of their culture and all that they deserve. The racism of lower expectations, I would call it, that gives identity politics supremacy at the expense of individuals within a so-called Muslim community. And what that does is allows Islamism to feign representation of the community, and it legitimizes Islamist sensibilities as the sensibilities of all so-called Muslims. If anything, the similarities, both in form and content, between the uprisings and revolutions in the region, with that of the 99% movement in Wall Street and London and Madrid and so on and so forth, proves this, that both, in a sense, are based both in form-wise on the actual occupation of public space, citizens taking back control, and content-wise too. If you look at the demands of both movements, you see that it's deeply rooted in the current economic crisis, mass unemployment and poverty. In fact, while people are calling it the Arab winter, the Arab Spring, as it's called, was sparked when a fruit vendor set himself alight because he was banned from selling fruit and making a meager living out of it. He was in fact a young, unemployed university graduate. Now, this whole idea of it already being called an Arab winter and, some surrendering to the Islamists on people's behalf is something that we need to be wary of. The reality is that these movements and revolutions were not Islamist movements and revolutions. The foot soldiers were workers, they were the poor, the women, youth, unemployed. Islamists didn't spearhead these movements, and they were never, they weren't in sight when they started. They were not instrumental in them. And Islamism has specific characteristics. You can't call anything Islamist. It has specific characteristics, from the demand for Sharia law to the demand for compulsory veiling, and so on and so forth. And what's very clear is that the movements that we saw were not, and the demands that they had were not Islamist demands. Clearly, though, what's happening is that revolutionary forces are not taking power. The Islamists are. And I think there are a number of reasons behind this. I think it's very difficult for countries to be able to have free and fair elections right after years of autocratic rule. It takes time for society to recover. I mean, even in a democracy like in Sweden, you don't necessarily get what you deserve, because democracy doesn't really represent, that's the illusion, isn't it, that it represents the will of the people. So let alone in a society that's been under dictatorship for so many decades. And I think if you look at Egypt too, you see that there were clashes around in Tahrir Square over the demand to delay the elections. Do you remember that? People were killed as a result, because everyone knows what happens if you have elections right after autocratic rule. Very often Islamists will win. And there's a number of reasons for that. One is the fact that they've got a superior level of organization. They've got backing from state powers and a very strong political movement. They have a history, and they've got access via social welfare organizations and mosques. And on the other hand, those who were involved in the revolution, often secular forces, are not well organized and don't have that power base and support. You have secularists in Europe who think that Islamism is people's demands and desires, honestly. So that solidarity that secularists need in the region is lacking. And so I think it's very easy for Islamists to take advantage of such situations and gain power. What's interesting is I think what it shows is actually what democracy really is. I think it reduces demands, legitimate demands of people for freedom and for liberation into a mere electoral process. And as long as some form of voting takes place, it doesn't matter what happens. And I think that's the illusion and the distortion of what democracy has come to represent. It's irrelevant whether people who fought and died on the streets with very human demands, whether they get equality and social justice and secularism, which I think are important as preconditions for people's lives to improve. And what's really interesting is all these postmodernist left who believe in, people's right to intervention, they're quite happy when this electoral process results in a state that is based on the divine. I mean, doesn't that sound like a contradiction when you think about it? And I think it's also a clear indication of the failings of this process. And what always seems to happen in the end is no matter how many people battled and died, parliamentary democracy is there to ensure that the establishment remains victorious. And if you look at Egypt, it's a very clear example. You have the Muslim Brotherhood and the Freedom and Justice Party, which is a counter-revolutionary force. Its victory is actually a victory for the establishment, which is why the army is allied with it and cooperating with it. It's not the other way around, though often the postmodernist left will portray Islamism as a force for liberation.